President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
In one of the greatest political comebacks in Canadian history, Mark Carney has kept the governing Liberal Party in power. It was an intense campaign dominated by tariffs and threats of annexation from U.S. President Donald Trump. So where does Canada go from here, and what will it mean for the relationship between the neighbours and once close allies? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. It was an election result that looked not just improbable, but impossible just a few months ago. Canada has voted in the Liberal Party for another term in government, a rare fourth consecutive mandate for the centre-left party. Mark Carney, a former central banker and economist, will stay on as Prime Minister. He'll be the man sitting across the table from US President Donald Trump as the two neighbours and once close allies confront disagreements on tariffs, military spending and even Canadian sovereignty. In his victory speech, Carney spoke out against what he called America's betrayal and said he's looking to build bridges with other allies. So, how much did Donald Trump impact Canada's vote? How will Prime Minister Carney manage his relationship with Washington? And what does this result mean for Canada on the world stage? We'll put that to our guests in just a moment. First, this report from Laura Khan.
Humility. It's Canada after all. Ambition. It's Canada after all. And unity. It's Canada.
Mark Carney, Canada's new Prime Minister, and the man who directly challenged US President Donald Trump's threats of annexation and a global trade war.
Is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
Educated at Harvard and Oxford universities, the former central banker guided Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and England through Brexit. A novice in politics, Carney took to Canada's campaign trail with two clear missions: to stand up to Donald Trump's trade war and to prove he was anything but a dry economist.
I'll always be Canadian.
But you live in the States.
Yeah, so?
Capital Saskatchewan.
Regina?
Tragically.
Hip?
What are the two seasons in Toronto?
Winter and construction?
Carney's win was a reversal of fortune for the Conservatives, who just 6 months earlier had secured a safe 25-point lead in the polls. This man, Pierre Poilievre, was all but ready to take the reins.
Well, I would like to congratulate Prime Minister Carney on leading this minority government.
But it was this man who would turn it upside down. In January, Donald Trump took power in the US and started looking north. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, once told Americans,
"We should never be living next to you is in some ways like sleeping with an elephant. No matter how friendly or even tempered is the beast, if I can call it that, one is affected by every twitch and grunt."
No longer friendly or even tempered, the unthinkable became a reality.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state.
With this, Canadians began to lose appetite for the once popular Poilievre, whose speeches seemed to echo Trump's America First policy.
We must work together, fight together, and win together. That is what it means to put Canada first.
And just 2 weeks before Trump stepped into office in early January, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepped down. Polling showed voters were tired of nearly a decade of his Liberal Party in power. The cost of living was going up, salaries were stagnant, and housing unaffordable. With fears of Trump's tariffs further shaking the economy, Canadians were ready for change. And it's this man, new to politics but an old hand in financial policy, they have chosen to navigate the country through economic uncertainty. Laura Khan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests now for today's show. In Ottawa, Robert Fife. He's the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail newspaper. In Vancouver, Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute, a public interest polling firm. And in New York, Cameron Ahmad, the former director of communications for Justin Trudeau, who served as Canadian Prime Minister until last month. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us on Inside Story. Cameron, let me start with you. A remarkable victory, no doubt, for Mark Carney and the Liberals, which was really considered dead and buried just a few months ago. What made this victory possible?
Absolutely. Well, a few things. Firstly, as you pointed out in your report, one issue dominated during this election above all others, and frankly, closely linked with all the other top issues from, trade, to the economy, cost of living. It all comes back to how Canada is going to deal with the United States right now, and how the government is going to position Canada to be successful despite the threats from the administration. So that, I think, really focused the conversation. And Mark Carney came in with a very clear and strong message. He was able to rally a largely new coalition of millions of people with some hope that with his background and expertise, he could turn things around for the Liberal Party. And I think the Conservative Party failed to pivot their message enough. They didn't have a completely terrible night, but they, throughout the campaign, were struggling to respond to the United States the way the Liberals had. So that's what I think explains this result, but a strong result for the Liberal Party.
Robert Fife, your thoughts. Should the Liberals be thanking Donald Trump today?
Absolutely, they should be thanking Donald Trump. For 2 years, the Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre, had double-digit figures. They were going to romp to a massive majority of government. People had been fed up with Justin Trudeau. There was voter fatigue. And along came Donald Trump. After Mr. Trudeau left, along came Donald Trump threatening a tariff war against Canada, talking about annexation. And Canadians looked to Mark Carney because of his impressive credentials. A Bank of Canada governor who led the country through the 2008 economic meltdown, and then because of that work, was lured over to Great Britain to head the Bank of England. And people thought, here's the guy that can deal with Donald Trump. Now, the only interesting thing about this is as long as Donald Trump kept talking like this, the Liberals kept doing very well in the polls. Right. But about a few weeks ago, Mr. Trump stopped talking about Canada, and the gap began to close. And so as we got closer to the election campaign, the Liberal lead shrunk. And one wonders if in fact there had been a couple more weeks in this campaign where the Conservatives would have won. Right.
And the irony, Robert, here is that Poilievre was more in line with Trump's conservative populist policies. I mean, the Conservative did make significant gains, but Poilievre lost his seat, right? So where do they go next? And how is he going to lead in opposition, Poilievre?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult for Mr. Poilievre to manage his caucus because he been such a control freak the way he dealt with them. And he also alienated some provincial premiers who could have been very helpful to helping him win government. And so I think there'll be a reckoning with the party. But given the fact that he still has increased the popular vote, increased the seat numbers, he's probably going to survive, and he'll find another seat, a safe seat somewhere else where he can run, and should be back in the House of Commons by the fall.
All right, Shachi, your thoughts. What became the defining issue in this election, and what direct impact did Donald Trump have on individual races?
Well, it's less about individual races and more really about three factors. I think they've already been well canvassed. First of all, the departure of Justin Trudeau at the beginning of January released a major pressure valve for a lot of disaffected voters who had drifted over to the Conservative Party, who were parking their votes with the left of center New Democratic Party, which The other subtext and narrative of this election result has really just been the implosion of that party and the coalescing of left of center voters under the Liberal banner. So that's that was one of the main narratives. You've heard Bob and Cameron talk about the Carney factor, Canadians liking the cut of his jib, but more importantly, it was about the fact that Carney, in terms of his rhetoric, met a very emotional moment that Canadians were experiencing. I think it's very important for your audience to understand that unlike many countries in Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, around the world, Canada, since its dominion in 1867, has never had its sovereignty threatened. And initially, Canadians laughed off the talk of Canada from Trump becoming the 51st state of annexation. And then after a while started to feel like, well, maybe he's not joking. This was a very rattling experience for Canadians. When we ask, I'm a pollster, when we ask Canadians, how do you feel about this? The top words they used were angry, betrayed, anxious. And what we saw from not only Mark Carney, but other provincial premiers, and Trudeau himself on the way out the door was a very reassuring message. And you heard some of that rhetoric. You did not hear the same kinds of messaging from Pierre Poilievre. This is less about what Pierre Poilievre did on the campaign trail and more about what he didn't do. He failed to meet the moment and meet the emotional space that Canadians were in. And then finally, the overarching issue, which is related to the tariff threat, was around cost of living and anxiety around job loss, household job loss, loss of income, and all of the things to do with economic anxiety.
Right.
Some of Mark Carney's credentials on that front, I'm going to finish my thought. Yeah. Some of Mark Carney's credentials on that front would have been appealing, but really this was also about I think laying bare the fact that Pierre Poilievre had challenges in terms of his own likability factors. He struggled to appeal to female voters. He struggled to appeal to great swaths of voters who thought that he looked pretty good compared to Justin Trudeau, but maybe not so good compared to Mark Carney.
And Shachi, we'll come back to that economic anxiety you talked about in a minute when we discuss the challenges that are awaiting Mark Carney. I wanted to ask you, Cameron, as a Canadian living in the US, how this victory is being viewed in America, because Mark Carney, it seems, was running as much against Donald Trump as against Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, I mean, it's for millions of Canadians, the tariffs are going to be hugely impactful in a negative way to their livelihoods, to our businesses, to our industries. So obviously this is a very irrelevant issue to have dominated the campaign. I think for the relationship moving forward, I think Mark Carney was able to position the campaign in a hopeful way by also talking about other alternatives that Canada could work with other countries, needs to diversify its trading relationships, needs to look at its productivity and its growth. And really the context has changed so dramatically in just a few years. So I think it makes a lot of sense that this campaign was dominated by this topic, but now moving forward, there are a lot of other big domestic issues that the government's going to have to deal with, and hopefully we'll see this unity that was really the defining message coming out of Mark Carney's speech last night. This unity really wrap itself around all parliamentarians and all parties, because that's certainly how a lot of Canadians have felt, that we need unity right now. To deal with this challenge.
Let's talk about those domestic issues, Robert, unity that Cameron mentioned there. How is Carney going to unify the country, especially when we're already hearing some rumblings in Western Canada, Western Canadians who felt marginalized, and we're seeing this separatist sentiment that existed in Quebec fade, and now we're hearing it grow in Western Canada, in Alberta. How is he going to deal with that? How will he be able to unify the country?
Well, first and foremost, he's got to come up with a way to deal with Donald Trump. He wants to begin immediate negotiations to see if we can create a new trading and security arrangement with the United States. That will take some time. Then he has to work with the provinces and in Parliament to bring down interprovincial trade barriers, which is a way of opening up more of a cross-country trading relationship in this country. And then he's talked a lot about trade corridors so that we can have more pipelines and natural gas facilities. But it's not going to be very challenging. One, because Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives are not going to be in the mood to help him out very much, and because his government is likely going to need the support of either the Bloc Québécois or the NDP, he's going to have to do a lot of brokerage politics. And finally, I think Mr. Carney has won seats in every province, so that will help him, particularly, and I think also will help him because the Conservatives got quite a number of seats in central Canada. So it's going to take a lot of the pressure off of him from Western Canada, who felt that they felt this was alienation, and there was some talk of separatism. But the fact that Ontario elected quite a large number of Conservatives, I think that takes the pressure off the Alberta and Saskatchewan, two provinces that have been talking about independence or the depth of Western alienation.
Shachi, your thoughts about that? What is going to be the most challenging for Carney dealing with, what's going on in Western Canada and those calls for a referendum on perhaps separating from the rest of Canada?
First of all, when we talk about Western Canada, let's be very, very clear. I am sitting in Vancouver, in British Columbia, which is the westernmost province in Canada. British Columbians are not interested in separatism, so we're really talking about some disgruntled voices in Alberta and Saskatchewan that total no more than 30% at their highest in either of those provinces. So these are not majorities of people, and nor do they represent the whole of the four western provinces west of Ontario. I think that's extremely important to clarify. But going to the notion of unity and unifying, yes, the Liberals and the Conservatives have managed to win seats across the country, but where the concentration and the big wins for the Liberals come back down to Quebec, Ontario, more so Atlantic Canada as well than you would see, for example, in Alberta or Saskatchewan. Yes, some of this national unity issue is very much predicated on the fact that Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular feel that the Liberals under Justin Trudeau over the last 9 years did not encourage and rather stifled the development and the sale offshore of natural resources, of oil and gas. So it will really come down to, can Mark Carney figure out a way to get Canada's natural resources, particularly oil and gas, out of the ground and to market? And can they find a way to really perhaps paint the Conservatives, who are pretty pro-oil and gas, into a corner and say, look, we want to do pipelines. We want to do other big projects. Carney has spent a lot of time talking about big projects. Last night in his victory speech, he said he was going to, I think, quote unquote, build, baby, build. That was one of his catchphrases. So, to back the Conservatives into a corner and say, look, we want to do these things. Are you profess to be in favor of these types of policies, going to vote against them? That may be a political wedge that the Liberals can use. But ultimately, this really does speak to the anxiety that Canadians are feeling. Fully 9 in 10 Canadians are worried right now about a looming recession, or the possibility of a looming recession. About 8 in 10 are worried about the prospect of household job loss. So yes, there's a moment or two or three to celebrate for the Liberals, and then it's roll up your sleeves. Try to figure out the Canada-US relationship. Try to figure out how to set the economy right in the face of declining productivity, and try to reestablish Canada's place in the world such that economically, from a security point of view, and from a multilateral point of view on any number of other issues, Canada is perhaps less tied to that Canada-US relationship.
Let's ask Cameron about that. How is Carney, Prime Minister Carney, going to navigate the relationship with Donald Trump now?
Well, he's going to have to do it with a lot of tact and stay very focused on his priorities and his message. I think one of the first things he demonstrated when he became prime minister just a short time ago was to shore up our relationships with other countries. He went to the UK, he went to France. He talked about the need to diversify our commerce with Asia and emerging markets around the world and Mexico. And that's something that Canada is actually quite well positioned to do, despite our dependence on trade with the United States, because we have free trade deals with many other countries. We have many natural resources, highly skilled and educated workers, and we're very connected people. So I think the positioning that he's done early on has been absolutely the right signal, and it's resonated with people. But also his background and his credibility on the world stage. I mean, he's someone who most world leaders have heard of, many of whom have worked with, especially in Europe, and are familiar with. And he's incredibly credible because of the crises that he's managed earlier on in his career, and the way he's been able to position Canada as strong and united, not going to back down, but going to work respectfully and pragmatically with the United States in the months ahead. So I think all of that has positioned him well for the next steps and putting Canada back on the world stage as a strong player, but an independent one.
Robert Fife, your thoughts. Where do you see the relationship with America, with Trump going? I mean, Donald Trump doesn't appear to have the same distaste for Carney that he clearly held for Justin Trudeau. Will, their political and policy interests continue to diverge, or do you see an improvement in the relationship?
Well, nobody can predict what Donald Trump is going to do from one moment to the next. Mark Carney is a very serious guy. I think the president probably respects him because of his role as the central banker in the UK and Canada, and as a major business figure. He has got great connections with wealthy U.S. business people. But it's going to be a major challenge. And I think the best thing that he can do is try to drag the puck as long as he possibly can. And because we know that the more Donald Trump talks about tariffs, the more he has to pause or back off, because the U.S. business community is very upset about these tariffs, and people who voted for Donald Trump are not happy with having to pay basically a tax because of his tariffs policy, so he can give wealthy people in the United States a big tax break. So it's going to be a huge challenge for Mark Carney. I think he's probably one Canadian who's very qualified in trying to deal with Donald Trump, but it won't be easy.
All right, Shachi, your thoughts. How worried are Canadians about Donald Trump, and how hopeful or concerned are they for the future?
Well, I think as I've outlined, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety that Canadians are feeling economically. The U.S. Trade relationship, the U.S. security relationship is also something that Canadians are no longer, I don't know that they ever took it fully for granted, but you're talking about, security relationships and arrangements, economic relationships and arrangements, the North American Free Trade Agreement that had basically until 2018, from 1993 until 2018, had gone untouched and had led to the economic prosperity of not only Canada, but also the United States and Mexico. So there is a tremendous amount of concern with Mark Carney, or with any new leader. There is an opportunity for a reset, and not just an appeal to Donald Trump, the man, the ego, and the chaotic nature of his decision making, but also to reset or to remind U.S. governors, senators, big city mayors, and others about the importance of the relationship. Already, as a result of some of the tariffs that have been imposed and the worries that other tariffs are looming, we've already started to see job losses. Auto manufacturing plants are being closed, or their hours are being reduced. And that is resulting in real economic consequences for Canadian families. The Liberals, though they have won an improbable and very historic fourth term in this situation, in part because the party has come back stronger than it did in the last two elections.
Right.
And in fact, has increased its vote share even from that very first 2015 majority election. It is probably poised to have one of the shortest honeymoons in history, because now Canadians will be looking with a tremendous amount of expectation to Mark Carney and to Ottawa to solve some pretty thorny, difficult to solve problems.
All right. Cameron, I'll come to you for the final word. I mean, the past year has been devastating for incumbent governments around the world, but the Canadian election seems to have broken that trend. What does this result mean, not just for Canada, but for Canada on the world stage?
Firstly, I think it means that you're seeing Canadians incredibly united. Yes, there is some political division and polarization between two big parties with different messages, but across the board, with regard to our position on the world stage, our sovereignty, our what we believe in our values, I think millions and millions of Canadians are united and are engaged in this conversation politically, but also in their daily lives. And of course, because it affects the economy in so many ways. And I think you're also seeing Canada rethink now how it positions itself on the world stage, as we've talked about with regard to other countries. How can we increase our ties with the rest of the world? How can we trade more with other countries? How can we be less dependent on one big market that we're physically attached to? And I think that there's a lot of openness from all Canadians, regardless of political stripe, to be thinking about new opportunities and to be creative about how we move forward and not stick to the status quo.
All right, Robert, I'll give you the last word. What are your thoughts? What does this election result mean for Canada on the world stage? What are its implications?
Well, look, the country is in a very challenging position, as is Europe and other countries around the world, because they're dealing with an unpredictable president, and nobody knows what he's going to do next. We don't know if he's going to cause even more economic damage, or is he going to back off. I think what Mr. Carney has tried to do is to build bridges with the UK and Europe and the European leaders, and we will have a test of that in June when he hosts the G7 leaders here in Canada. It's going to be a challenge for Mr. Carney to be able to have the 6 other leaders trying to deal with Donald Trump. My view on all of this is we have never seen a figure like Donald Trump in our lives, and it's just so difficult to make any kind of predictions of where we're going to go and what will be the impact on Canada or indeed the rest of the world.
Indeed, it'll be very interesting to see what the next few months show us. Thank you so much, Robert Fife, Shachi, Kurl, Cameron, Ahmad, for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you, too, for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And, of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.